My son betrayed me, but he forgot I held the deed. The mailman used to joke that retirement suited me, and for 5 years, I believed him. That belief shattered the day he handed me a registered letter containing a legal petition to declare me mentally incompetent. The petitioner's name at the bottom was the cruelest blow my son, Leo, the very man I'd handed my life's work to. The scent of white pine hung in the air, a clean, sharp perfume that had defined Arthur Blackwood's life. In his workshop, a place of quiet order behind his modest home, a half-finished rocking horse stood on the workbench. Its curves were smooth as river stone, testament to a lifetime of skill that lived more in his hands than in his mind. Retirement had not been an ending for him, but a return to this purer form of his craft, wood, steel, and silence, with no balance sheets or payroll to haunt the edges of his day. He ran a calloused thumb over the horse's flag, feeling for imperfections the eye might miss. There were none. His routine was a bulwark against the formlessness of his later years. Coffee at sunrise, workshop until noon, a simple lunch, and then the mail. Frank, the mail carrier, always arrived at 1:10, his van rattling up the gravel driveway with a comforting predictability. Today was no different, until it was. Along with the usual assortment of catalogs and a letter from his sister, there was a stiff, business-sized envelope. It was a registered letter, demanding a signature. "Looks important, Arthur," Frank said, holding out the electronic clipboard. "Probably your sweepstakes winnings." Arthur managed a thin smile and scrawled his name, the stylus feeling clumsy and foreign compared to the familiar heft of a chisel. He took the envelope, noting the return address was a law firm downtown he didn't recognize. Inside the house, the silence felt different, heavier. He slit the top open with a kitchen knife, his movements precise, and unfolded the heavy bond paper within. The words were a thicket of legal jargon, dense and intimidating. He scanned the page, his eyes catching on phrases that felt like blows from a mallet. Petition to establish conservatorship. Inability to manage financial affairs. Evidence of cognitive decline. A cold dread, slick and oily, coated his throat. This was a mistake. Some terrible, bureaucratic error that had landed on his doorstep. He read on, his mind scrabbling for a rational explanation, until his gaze fell upon the bottom of the first page, to the line marked petitioner. The world narrowed to 2 words, printed in crisp, clean type. Leo Blackwood. The paper did not tremble in his hand. Arthur's hand trembled around the paper. The fine grain of the rocking horse, the scent of pine, the entire ordered universe he had built for himself, it all dissolved into a soundless roar in his ears. He had given his son everything the business had built, from splintered boards and sweat, the family name, the trust of a father who saw his own legacy living on. And in return, his son had signed a document that declared him little more than a child, a mind in ruin, a man who could no longer be trusted with his own life. The signature he had just provided to receive this poison felt like a final, bitter irony. He had just signed for his own execution. He did not call first. An appointment felt like a concession to their new reality, an acceptance of the terms laid out in that thick, cream-colored paper. Arthur drove his old but meticulously maintained truck across town, the legal document lying flat on the passenger seat like a dead thing. The city he had helped build, one frame and truss at a time, passed by his window in a blur of unfamiliar glass and steel. He was heading to the new subdivision on the West Hill, a place of identical, sprawling houses with pristine lawns, where his son lived. Leo and Chloe's home was a monument to modern taste, all sharp angles, gray siding, and oversized windows that seemed to watch the street with a blank, judgmental stare. Chloe answered the door, her surprise so perfectly feigned it was a work of art in itself. She wore expensive athletic wear, though not a single hair was out of place. "Arthur. What a surprise. Is everything okay?" Her voice was a smooth, polished stone, leaving no room for genuine emotion. Arthur stepped past her into the cavernous foyer. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of lemon and something synthetic. "I need to speak with Leo." Leo emerged from a side room, a tablet in his hand. He had his mother's height but a softness around the jaw that Arthur never possessed. When he saw the envelope in his father's hand, his expression tightened for a fraction of a second before melting into one of rehearsed sorrow. "Dad. You got it. I was going to call you." Arthur walked past them into the living room, a sterile space dominated by a white sofa and a single, abstract painting. He placed the petition on the glass coffee table. The sound of the paper hitting the surface was the loudest thing in the room. "Explain this," Arthur said. His voice was level, stripped of everything but the question. It was the voice he used when a joist was cut too short, when a foundation was poured incorrectly. It was a demand for facts, not feelings. Chloe moved to Leo's side, placing a proprietary hand on his arm. "We were so worried this would upset you," she began, her tone dripping with a condescending sympathy. "Leo has been agonizing over this." "We've been agonizing." "Dad, it's just we're worried," Leo echoed, his eyes not quite meeting Arthur's. "There have been signs. Little things." Arthur waited, his gaze fixed on his son. He would not make this easy for them. "Remember last month, when you couldn't find your car keys?" Chloe offered, as if presenting Exhibit A. "You were sure someone had taken them. You were frantic." Arthur remembered. Had misplaced them in the pocket of his work coat. Had found them in under 5 minutes. "And the property tax bill," Leo added, gaining momentum. "You sent the check to the water company by mistake." Chloe spent a whole afternoon on the phone sorting it out. "We don't want you to have to deal with that kind of stress anymore." Each example was a tiny truth, twisted and magnified into a grotesque caricature of senility. It was a masterful demolition, using his own life as the raw material. Had once forgotten a neighbor's name at the grocery store. Had put a carton of milk in the cupboard. These were not signs of a failing mind, they were the inconsequential static of a life being lived. In their mouths, however, they became a closing argument. "We just want to make sure you're protected," Chloe said, her voice softening into a therapeutic coo. "So that you, and the company, are safe." Leo has so many new ideas, big plans for expansion. He needs to be able to move forward without complications. There it was. The foundation beneath the lie. It wasn't about his health, it was about the business. It was about their ambition. Arthur looked from Chloe's determined face to his son's averted gaze and saw the entire blueprint of their betrayal. They had not come to this decision in a moment of panic. This was planned, measured, and executed with the cold precision of a hostile takeover. He stood up, his silence a judgment more potent than any accusation. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't pleaded. He had simply watched them build their case, and in doing so, watched them build their own cage. "I see," he said, the two words falling like chips of granite into the stillness. He turned and walked out, leaving the document on their perfect glass table, a testament to a son who had tried to bury his father before he was dead. The drive home was a silent void. Arthur kept the truck's radio off, the hum of the engine and the rumble of the tires on asphalt the only sounds. The anger from the confrontation had already burned away, leaving behind a cold, heavy ash in his gut. He had expected denial, perhaps, or a flash of guilt from Leo. What he had received was worse, a calm, rational, and utterly soulless justification. They had rehearsed it. They had prepared their talking points. This was not a rash decision, it was a project, and he was the structure they intended to demolish. The next morning, the world began to shrink. It started at the lumber yard, a place where his credit was as old and solid as the oak beams stacked out back. He was picking up a small supply of birch plywood for a set of cabinets he was making for a local charity auction. At the counter, a young man he didn't recognize swiped the business card he kept from his active years, a card Leo had insisted he retain for expenses and hobbies. The machine beeped twice, a flat, negative tone. "Sorry, sir." "It's declined," the clerk said, not meeting his eyes. Arthur felt a flush of heat on his neck. "That's not possible." Try it again. The clerk did, with the same result. An older man, the yard foreman who'd known Arthur for 30 years, came over. Everything all right, Arthur? Cards not working, Arthur said, his voice tight. The foreman gave the clerk a look, a subtle signal of pity and understanding that was more insulting than the declined transaction itself. Don't worry about it, Arthur. Put it on the main Blackwood account. Leo will sort it. Arthur's jaw clenched. He pulled his personal wallet from his back pocket and laid cash on the counter. No. I'll pay for it myself. He didn't want their charity. He didn't want to be a problem Leo had to sort. He loaded the plywood into his truck, the weight of the wood feeling insignificant compared to the weight of the invisible walls now closing in around him. Later that week, he ran into Jim Peterson at a diner. They had come up together, two young carpenters competing for the same jobs, eventually becoming friends who respected each other's work. Jim's handshake was soft, his eyes clouded with a sympathy that made Arthur's skin crawl. Heard you're taking it easy now, Jim said, sliding into the opposite side of the booth. Good for you. I've been retired for 5 years, Jim, Arthur stated, stirring his coffee. Yeah, but really taking it easy, Jim pressed, leaning forward conspiratorially. Leo's a good boy, Arthur. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He and that lovely wife of his, they're just looking out for you. The trap was bigger than he'd thought. Its tendrils reached beyond the courthouse and the bank. It was in the minds of his friends, in the whispers at the lumber yard and the diner. Leo and Chloe hadn't just filed a petition, they had launched a campaign. They had seeded a story, their carefully crafted narrative of a confused old man who needed protecting from himself. He was being redefined in the eyes of everyone who knew him. He finished his coffee, the bitter liquid doing nothing to wash the taste of betrayal from his mouth. Driving home, the pieces clicked into place with the finality of a coffin lid shutting. The declined card wasn't just about money, it was about demonstrating his incompetence. Jim's pity wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was proof of their story as success. They were building a case not just for a judge, but for the world, isolating him until the legal declaration of his decline would feel like a foregone conclusion. They weren't just taking his company, they were taking his name, his reputation, his very reality. He was being walled in, brick by brick, by the hands of his own son. The workshop, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum for a life that was over. The clean scent of pine mocked him with its honesty. The half-finished rocking horse seemed to watch him with a vacant, wooden pity. He couldn't work. His hands, which had known the language of wood and steel for 50 years, felt like clumsy appendages. The precision he prided himself on, the ability to measure twice and cut once, had utterly failed him in raising a son. He left the workshop and went into the house, to a room he hadn't spent more than a few minutes in since his wife passed. The study. It was a place of paperwork and memory, paneled in dark cherry had installed himself in the early days. A fine layer of dust coated everything, a soft gray blanket over the past. Unlike the rest of the house, this room had not been updated. It smelled of old paper, leather, and the faint, sweet aroma of his wife's perfume that had somehow seeped into the curtains. He wasn't looking for a weapon. He didn't have the stomach for a fight, not the kind they had started. He was looking for an answer, a point on the blueprint of his life where the structural integrity had been compromised. He needed to understand how the foundation he had poured with his own hands had crumbled so completely. For 2 days, he worked. He didn't rage or despair. He organized. With the same methodical patience he would use to restore a piece of antique furniture, he began to excavate his own history. He pulled out heavy ledgers, metal boxes filled with manila folders, and binders stiff with age. He created stacks on the large oak desk. Taxes. Payroll. Incorporation papers. Contracts. Each document was a ghost. A contract from 1985 for the town library renovation, his first major solo project. A photograph tucked into a ledger of a 10-year-old Leo, beaming with pride as he held a small, lopsided birdhouse they'd built together. Arthur set the photo aside, the memory too sharp to bear. He was charting the growth of Blackwood Construction, from a one-man operation run out of his garage to the respected firm he had handed over. He saw his signature evolve over the years, from a young man's ambitious scrawl to a more measured, confident script. And then, he saw Leo's signature begin to appear, first on supply orders, then on bigger contracts. He had been so proud. He had seen it as continuity, as legacy. He saw now that it was a slow, deliberate replacement. Late on the second night, his fingers dusty and his eyes aching from reading fine print, he opened a long, flat box labeled property. He was looking for the documents from when he de-incorporated the business, the moment Arthur Blackwood, carpenter, became Blackwood Son Construction. Inside were surveys, zoning permits, and at the very bottom, a thick, folded document, heavier than the others, almost like parchment. He carefully unfolded it. It was the original land deed for the 2-acre plot on the edge of town where the workshop, the lumber yard, and the company offices now stood. The purchase date was 1978, 5 years before Leo was even born and a full decade before the business was officially incorporated. He remembered saving for it, buying the raw, undeveloped land when it was nothing but a field of weeds and dreaming of what he would build. The buyer listed on the deed wasn't a company. It was just him. Arthur Blackwood. It was the first and most important thing he had ever owned, the very ground on which everything else was built. The old deed was a map to a life he had almost forgotten. Holding it, Arthur could feel the ghost of the ambitious 30-year-old he had been, a man who saw in a fallow field not weeds and rocks, but the foundation of a future. But this document alone wasn't a solution, it was merely a fact. A critical one, to be sure, but Leo and his lawyers would know he owned the land. He had never made a secret of it. The real question was not about ownership, but about the arrangement. How did the land he owned personally connect to the business he had given to his son? The answer had to be in the study. Somewhere in the forest of paper was the legal bridge between Arthur Blackwood the man, and Blackwood Son Construction the entity. He turned his attention from the property box to one he hadn't opened in over a decade, its label faded but still legible estate incorporation. The hinges creaked in protest as he lifted the lid. Inside, the files were organized with the help of his late wife, her neat, cursive handwriting a quiet pang in his chest. He bypassed the initial incorporation papers and the succession plan had so carefully drafted with Leo 5 years ago. He was looking for something older. Tucked at the back, in a folder marked Trusts Leases, he found it. It was not a simple one-page lease agreement as he half remembered. It was a formal, multi-page document bound in a faded blue cover. The Blackwood Legacy Trust. The memory came back to him not as a flood, but as a single, clear image. He was sitting in the office of his old lawyer, a shrewd, cautious man named Miller who had since passed away. Miller had insisted on it when Arthur incorporated the business. "You're putting your greatest asset, the land, into the service of a new, separate company," Miller had explained, peering over his spectacles. "You need a firewall, Arthur. A way to protect the ground itself should the business ever fail, or worse, fall into the wrong hands." Arthur had trusted Leo implicitly. "It's my son, Miller. It's family. Family is why you build walls," Miller had countered, his voice gentle but firm. "Not to keep people out, but to make sure everyone knows where the doors are. This trust will own the land. You will be the sole trustee. The trust will then lease the land to the corporation for a nominal fee. The business gets its home, and you keep ultimate control of the foundation." Arthur remembered signing the papers, feeling it was an overly cautious, even slightly paranoid, step. He'd filed them away and, in the day-to-day running of the business, had all but forgotten the specifics, remembering only that the land and company were somehow separate. He spread the document open on the desk now, the dry paper crackling under the lamplight. He scanned the dense paragraphs, his finger tracing the legal architecture Miller had constructed. It was all there: the trust as landlord, the corporation as tenant. Then he saw it, halfway down page 4, a subclause in a section titled Covenants and Conditions of the Trustee. It was a paragraph dense with legal phrasing, but its meaning was as clear and sharp as a saw blade. Miller had called it the fiduciary duty clause. It stipulated that as the primary beneficiary of the trust, Arthur's well-being was its paramount concern. The lease between the trust and the corporation was conditional upon this. The clause stated that should any officer or majority shareholder of the lessee Blackwood Sun Construction initiate or participate in a hostile legal action intended to disenfranchise or declare the trustee incapacitated, the act itself would constitute a fundamental breach of the lease agreement. The final sentence hit him with the force of a physical blow. Upon such a breach, the lease is rendered null and void, ipso facto, with the trustee granted immediate and full rights to reclaim the property and its fixed assets. There was no joy in the discovery. No triumphant surge of adrenaline. There was only a profound and hollow sadness. His old, dead lawyer had seen a threat that he himself, a loving father, had been blind to. Miller had built him a fail-safe, an emergency exit from a burning building he never believed would catch fire. Leo, in his rush to seize the house, had forgotten that his father still owned the ground beneath it. He hadn't just filed a petition against his father, he had signed his own eviction notice. The discovery of the trust document did not bring sleep. Arthur sat in the dusty silence of the study until dawn, the legal papers spread before him like a battle plan drawn up by a ghost. He had the means, but the will to use it felt brittle. To enact the clause was to formally acknowledge the end of his family, to take a hammer to the last support beam holding up the facade. He was a builder, not a demolitions expert. Every instinct in him recoiled from the act of tearing down what he had spent a lifetime constructing. He knew he couldn't do this alone. The isolation Leo had engineered was now a practical problem. He needed a lawyer, a good one, but he couldn't walk into an office and put the retainer on a personal credit card without it potentially being used as further evidence of his profligate spending. He needed an ally, someone outside the web of pity and deception his son had spun. There was only one person. His sister, Elena. The call was one he had been avoiding for years. They weren't fighting, not exactly. Their relationship had simply eroded over time, worn down by distance and differing philosophies. Elena, a retired history professor, lived 3 states away. She was sharp, academic, and had a way of seeing the world in black and white that often chafed against Arthur's more measured, hands-on approach. Most pointedly, she had never been charmed by Chloe and had always treated Leo with a polite, but visible, skepticism. It had been a source of tension, a quiet disagreement that had slowly widened into a chasm of infrequent holiday cards and stilted birthday calls. He dialed her number, the phone feeling unnaturally heavy in his hand. She answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and precise as he remembered. "Arthur. Is everything all right?" There was no preamble, no gentle way to ease into it. He told her everything, his voice a low monotone as he recounted the registered letter, the visit to Leo's house, the whispers and averted eyes around town. He spoke of the business he had built and the son he thought he knew. He did not embellish or complain, he stated the facts as he would list the materials for a job. On the other end of the line, there was only silence. He heard her breathing, a steady, rhythmic sound. She was listening, processing, not interrupting with platitudes or shock. When he finished, the silence stretched for a few more seconds. "That boy," she said, her voice devoid of surprise, was always soft in the center. "And that wife of his, she's a climber." "I'm not shocked, Arthur. I'm just sorry." The lack of surprise was, strangely, a comfort. He wasn't a fool for having missed it, he was a father. Elena had seen the grain of the wood more clearly because she wasn't the one who had planted the tree. "I found something," he continued, and explained the trust, the lease, and Miller's fail-safe clause. Now he heard a change in her breathing, a quick intake of air. "Miller. Of course. That man thought in chess moves. So, you have a checkmate," but you don't have a lawyer to help you call it. I can't hire one myself. They're watching every penny. They'd use it against me. Don't you worry about that, Elena said, her voice shifting from academic observation to strategic command. I know someone. A former student of mine who went into law. She is not one of these slick, downtown types. She's a bulldog. Specializes in estate and contract disputes. I'll call her, and I will pay her retainer. It will be a gift from me to you. Let them try and spin that as evidence of your incompetence. A weight he hadn't fully acknowledged lifted from Arthur's shoulders. The quiet isolation was broken. The walls were still there, but now someone had thrown him a rope from the other side. Elena, he started, the words catching in his throat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. Just promise me one thing. When this lawyer calls, you listen to her. Don't let your sentiment get in the way of the facts. You didn't start this fire, Arthur, but you're the only one who can put it out. The lawyer's name was Maria Alvarez. She didn't operate out of a glass tower downtown but from a small, restored brick building in a neighborhood of artists and tradesmen. Her office was neat, functional, and devoid of the usual mahogany and leather posturing. She was younger than Arthur had expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a handshake as firm as his own. Elena's description had been accurate. Maria Alvarez was not a litigator who performed, she was a tactician who built cases. Arthur laid out the documents on her conference table: the competency petition, the trust agreement, the land deed, and the lease. He explained the situation with the same dispassionate clarity he had used with his sister. He was not a victim seeking pity, he was a craftsman presenting a problem. Maria listened without interruption, her focus absolute. She read each document twice, her pen making small, precise notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finally looked up, her expression was one of cool, professional anger. Davy built a cage for you out of paper, she said, tapping a finger on the petition. And they're trying to convince a judge you're too confused to find the door. They want to make this about your mind, about your memory. They want you on the witness stand, flustered and defensive, trying to prove you're sane. We're not going to play that game. Relief washed over Arthur. She understood. She saw the shape of the trap. The petition is a weapon, Maria continued, her voice gaining a hard, strategic edge. But your son made a classic mistake. He aimed his weapon at you, the man, but he completely ignored you, the trustee. He failed to read the fine print on the ground he is standing on. She picked up the trust and lease documents. This, she said, holding them up, is our entire case. This isn't about your health. It's not about whether you forgot your keys last Tuesday. This is a simple, elegant matter of contract law. Your son, as CEO of Blackwood Sun Construction, initiated a hostile legal action. In doing so, he broke the lease. It's that simple. Over the next week, they worked. Maria's approach was that of a master carpenter framing a house. Every piece had to be cut perfectly, every joint flush. There would be no room for error. She had Arthur write a detailed, notarized affidavit recounting the events, focusing only on the facts. She gathered his financial records, showing years of responsible management. She filed the necessary documents with the court, not to argue against the competency hearing directly, but to put them on notice of a separate, superseding legal matter. We are not defending, she told him during one of their meetings. We are attacking. But we're not attacking with emotion. We're using their own actions as the fulcrum. The more they push on the competency hearing, the more leverage they give us on the breach of contract. Davy handed us the hammer. There would be no medical examinations to contest, no parade of tearful, concerned friends testifying to his decline. The strategy was to render the entire competency hearing irrelevant before it even began. Arthur's mental state was a red herring, a distraction from the real issue. The real issue was the land. Arthur felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't just a passive target anymore. He was back in his element, working with a professional, following a clear set of blueprints. He was building his defense. The pain was still there, a deep, foundational crack in his heart, but the helpless feeling of isolation was gone. He was no longer a confused old man waiting for a judge to decide his fate. He was a property owner, and his tenant was about to be served notice. The day before the scheduled hearing was gray and overcast, the sky the color of wet cement. Arthur did not go to his workshop. He did not pace his house. He sat in his study, the room where his counteroffensive had been born, and waited. Maria had told him what would happen, the precise sequence of events she had set in motion. Knowing the plan didn't stop the knot of ice from forming in his stomach. This was the moment the first structural nail was pulled. After this, there would be no going back. Across town, Leo Blackwood was in his office, the one that had once been Arthur's. It was larger now, remodeled to Chloe's exacting standards with minimalist furniture and a large, frameless glass wall that looked out over the lumber yard. He was on a conference call with an architect, discussing a lucrative new bid for a suburban development, the very kind of expansion that had fueled his and Chloe's ambition. He was confident, his voice smooth and authoritative. The hearing tomorrow was a formality, a sad but necessary step to secure the company's future and protect his father from his own deteriorating mind. His lawyer had assured him it was a straightforward case. He didn't notice the unremarkable sedan that pulled into the visitor parking lot. He didn't see the man in the ill-fitting suit who walked past the gleaming company sign, Blackwood Sun Construction, and entered the reception area. The receptionist, a young woman Leo had hired a month ago, tried to stop him. "Can I help you? Mr. Blackwood is on a call." "I have a delivery for Leo Blackwood," the man said, his voice flat and official. "I'm required to deliver it to him personally." She buzzed the office door. Leo, annoyed at the interruption, put his call on hold. "What is it?" he snapped as the man entered. The man didn't say a word. He simply extended a thick envelope. Leo took it, expecting a revised set of blueprints or a courier package. The man turned and walked out as soon as Leo's fingers closed around the paper. Leo tore it open, his irritation turning to confusion, then to disbelief. It wasn't from his lawyer. The document was titled Notice to Quit for Breach of Covenant. He scanned the dense text, his eyes snagging on legal phrases that felt alien and threatening. The Blackwood Legacy Trust Fiduciary Duty Clause ipso facto breach. He didn't understand the complex language, but the final paragraph was written in brutally plain English. It informed him that, as a result of the legal action he had initiated against the trustee, Arthur Blackwood, the lease agreement for the property and all its fixed assets was now void. Blackwood Sun Construction was no longer a legal tenant. They were now trespassing. They had 30 days to vacate the premises. The notice was signed by Maria Alvarez, attorney for the trustee, and a copy, it noted at the bottom, had been concurrently filed with the county court and all financial institutions holding liens against the company. The blood drained from his face. He stumbled back, sinking into his expensive ergonomic chair. The glass wall no longer looked like a window onto his empire, it was a transparent cage. He looked out at the workshop his father had built, the stacks of lumber, the trucks bearing his family name. He had spent months plotting to take control of his father's mind, to seize the company he believed was his by right. It had never once occurred to him that he didn't own the ground. His phone buzzed. It was Chloe. He answered, but he couldn't form words. The smooth, confident voice he'd been using with the architect was gone, replaced by a strangled whisper. He had been so focused on the prize, had forgotten to check the foundations. And his father, the quiet old man he had dismissed and tried to discard, had just pulled them out from under him. The courtroom was a small, stuffy affair, paneled in the same dark wood Arthur had spent his life working with. He sat beside Maria Alvarez at the defendant's table, his back straight, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He wore a simple, dark suit, one he usually reserved for weddings and funerals. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a play about his own life. Across the aisle, Leo and Chloe sat with their lawyer, a man with a polished silver mane and an air of expensive confidence that seemed slightly dimmed this morning. Leo was pale, his eyes puffy and red-rimmed. Chloe, however, was a statue of defiant composure, her gaze fixed forward, refusing to meet Arthur's. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with a weary but sharp expression, entered and the proceedings began. Leo's lawyer stood and launched into his opening statement, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. He painted a picture of a beloved patriarch, a giant of local industry, now sadly succumbing to the inevitable fog of age. He spoke of misplaced keys and mistaken bill payments, the small anecdotes now polished into a legal narrative of cognitive decline. He framed the petition not as an act of aggression, but as one of filial love and desperate concern. Arthur listened to the twisted portrayal of his life without flinching. Maria had prepared him for this. "Let them build their house of cards," she had said. "It's easier to knock over a finished structure." When it was her turn, Maria did not rise with dramatic flair. She stood calmly and addressed the judge in a clear, measured tone. "Your Honor," she began, "my client, Mr. Arthur Blackwood, is not here today to debate the location of his car keys or the occasional misfiling of a household bill. We are not here to put his memory on trial. We are here because a petition has been filed. A petition which, on its face, alleges incapacity. However, the true nature of this proceeding is not medical, it is financial. And the petitioner's actions have consequences he did not foresee." She walked to the clerk and submitted a folder of documents. "Your Honor, this is a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for Blackwood Sun Construction, a copy of the deed for the land on which it operates, and a copy of the lease agreement between the landowner, a personal trust established by my client 30 years ago, and the corporation, the lessee." Leo's lawyer, who had been leaning back with a look of bored tolerance, sat bolt upright. Maria continued, her voice never rising. "The petitioner, Mr. Leo Blackwood, in his capacity as CEO of the corporation, has forgotten a critical detail. His company is a tenant. The landlord is the Blackwood Legacy Trust, and the sole trustee is my client. I would direct your attention to Article 4, Section 2 of the lease agreement." She projected the clause onto a screen for the court to see. The dense legal language filled the air. Maria read the final, critical sentence aloud. "Upon such a breach, the lease is rendered null and void, ipso facto." "Your Honor," Maria stated, turning back to the judge, "the moment Mr. Leo Blackwood signed and filed this competency petition, a hostile legal action by any definition, he triggered this clause. He broke the contract. He invalidated his own company's right to exist on that property." She placed a final document on the clerk's desk. "This is a copy of the notice to quit, which was served to Mr. Blackwood yesterday. Blackwood Sun Construction is, as of this moment, illegally occupying the property." A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Leo's lawyer was on his feet, stammering about procedural ambush and irrelevant contractual matters. But the judge was not looking at him. She was looking at the documents, her expression shifting from weariness to a sharp, focused indignation. She looked from the eviction notice to Leo's pale, shocked face. "So let me be clear, counsel," the judge said, her voice cutting through the room like a circular saw. "Your client is asking this court to declare his father incompetent, which would give him control over the man's assets. And in the process of doing so, he has managed to get himself and the entire company evicted from the very property he is trying to control." Maria simply nodded. "That is the situation, Your Honor. This was never about a father's health. It was a failed corporate coup, and the petitioner's own greed has triggered the consequences." The judge stared at Leo for a long, silent moment. She saw it all, the ambition, the callousness, the stunning oversight. There was no need for medical testimony or witnesses. The story was written in the contracts. She picked up her gavel. This court finds no credible evidence to proceed with a competency hearing. Petition dismissed. The sound of the gavel striking the wood was sharp and final. It was a sound Arthur knew well, the sound of a nail being driven home. He felt no victory, only the profound, aching silence of an empty room. Arthur didn't wait for Leo outside the courtroom. There were no words left to say. The legal mechanism he had set in motion was now operating under its own power, a series of dominoes clicking over in a sequence he could not, and would not, stop. He went home, changed out of his suit, and walked into his workshop. The scent of pine was still there, but it no longer felt like a mockery. It was simply the smell of his life, a life he had just reclaimed. The real consequences of the judge's dismissal were not felt in the hushed corridors of the courthouse, but in the sterile, air-conditioned offices of the city's banks. As Maria had noted in the eviction notice, copies had been sent to all financial institutions with an interest in Blackwood Sun Construction. The dismissal of the petition was a moral victory. The eviction notice was a financial bomb. A business like Leo's, heavily leveraged for expansion, is not valued on its cash flow alone. It is valued on its assets. The workshop, the heavy machinery bolted to the concrete floor, the offices, the lumber yard, these were not just tools of the trade. They were the collateral. They were the solid, tangible reality that backed up the multi-million-dollar loans Leo and Chloe had secured for their grand suburban development project. And overnight, the company no longer owned, or even had a legal right to occupy, its most valuable asset. The first call Leo received was not from his father, but from a vice president at the regional bank. The man's voice, usually warm and encouraging, was now as cold as a foreclosure notice. He had questions. A routine audit had flagged a material change in the company's asset profile. Could Leo explain the situation with the property on Mill Road? Leo, scrambling and panicked, tried to downplay it. He called it a family disagreement, a temporary legal spat that would soon be resolved. But bankers do not deal in family dynamics, they deal in risk. And a company that had just been evicted from its base of operations was the definition of risk. The vice president informed Leo that, for the terms of their loan agreement, such a material change triggered a covenant review. All further credit was frozen, effective immediately. The second call was from the national lender that had financed the new fleet of trucks and heavy equipment. Their tone was less inquisitive and more direct. The equipment was collateralized not just by itself, but by the business as a whole. A business that was now, for all intents and purposes, homeless, was technically in default. They were exercising their right to call the loan. The entire balance was due in 30 days. The house of cards didn't just fall, it was obliterated by a gale force wind. Within a week, Blackwood Sun Construction was insolvent. The expansion project, which had existed only on paper and borrowed money, vanished. The suppliers, hearing the rumors, demanded cash on delivery. Key employees, seeing the writing on the wall, began circulating their resumes. For Leo and Chloe, the corporate collapse was followed by a personal one. They had personally guaranteed the loans. Their sprawling house on the West Hill, their luxury cars, their carefully curated lifestyle, it was all tied to the company's success. The banks, having lost their primary collateral, now turned to their secondary, everything the couple owned. Arthur watched from a distance. He received no calls of apology or rage from his son. He only heard the news through the quiet, regretful gossip of old friends like Jim Peterson, who now spoke of Leo not as a concerned son, but as a fool who had overplayed his hand. The justice was not born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was the simple, brutal arithmetic of finance. Leo had tried to steal the company, forgetting that its value wasn't in the name on the sign, but in the solid ground beneath it. He hadn't just betrayed his father, he had gambled with his father's life's work and lost everything in a single, arrogant bet. 30 days after the notice was served, the trucks came. They were not Arthur's trucks, or Leo's. They belonged to the bank's asset recovery division. Arthur watched from the window of his house as they loaded the saws, the lathes, the planers, the heavy steel spine of the business he had built. Each piece that was chained down and hauled away felt like a memory being amputated. Finally, they removed the sign. The blue and white sign that read Blackwood Sun Construction. They left it lying face down in the gravel, an epitaph for a name that was now synonymous with failure. A week later, Elena flew in. She found Arthur not in his house, but in the cavernous, silent workshop. He was sweeping. Dust motes danced in the long shafts of afternoon light slanting through the high windows. The concrete floor was a map of what used to be, with clean patches and dark oil stains marking the ghosts of machinery. The air, for the first time in 40 years, smelled only of dust and cool concrete, the familiar perfume of pine and sawdust finally gone. Elena walked to the center of the room, her sensible shoes making soft, echoing taps. She didn't key offer empty comforts. She simply stood beside him, a silent partner in his survey of the wreckage. "It's bigger than I remember," she said, her voice filling the void. "And emptier." "That it is," Arthur said, leaning on his broom. He looked at the vast, open space. He saw the spectral image of Leo as a boy, clumsily sweeping sawdust into a pile, his face a mask of concentration. He saw his wife bringing him a thermos of coffee on a cold winter morning. He saw a lifetime of work, of purpose, of noise and creation, all of it now just a hollow echo. "So," Elena said, her tone practical, turning from the past to the future. "What is the plan?" "You could sell the land. A developer would pay a fortune for 2 acres this close to town. You could travel. See the world you spent your life building for." Arthur was silent for a long time, his gaze sweeping over the empty room. Selling was the logical choice. It was the clean break. But the thought of a strip mall or a block of condominiums rising from this ground felt like a final, desecrating blow. It would erase everything. "I won," he said, the words quiet, heavy. "I defended myself. I kept my home, my name. But I look at this, and it doesn't feel like a victory. I lost my son long before that day in court. I see that now." He was so desperate to build something bigger, faster he forgot how to build it right. He forgot the foundation. He ran his calloused hand over the worn surface of a workbench he had built himself, the only thing he hadn't allowed the bank to take. This company, the one he was running, it wasn't my company anymore. The name was the same, but the spirit was gone. It was just a vehicle for his and Chloe's ambition. Maybe it had to be torn down. Elena watched him, her sharp eyes softening with an understanding that transcended their years of distance. "You didn't tear it down, Arthur. You simply pointed out it was built on a sinkhole. It fell on its own." Arthur nodded slowly. "I don't want to sell, Elena. I don't want to run away from this place. This ground is still good." He looked at his own hands, the hands of a maker. They were old, scarred, but they still knew how to build. "I was thinking about the young people I see today. Kids who are smart and capable, but no one has taught them how to work with their hands. They can code an app, but they can't frame a wall or dovetail a joint." A new light began to dawn in his eyes, a flicker of purpose in the hollow emptiness. "This place, it doesn't have to be about profit. It doesn't have to be Blackwood Sun. What if it was just Blackwood S?" He turned to his sister, the idea taking shape as he spoke it. "A school. A non-profit trade school. We could teach carpentry, masonry, welding. The real crafts. We could give kids a skill, a purpose. Something solid they can build a life on." He looked around the cavernous space again, but this time he wasn't seeing ghosts. He was seeing rows of new workbenches. He was hearing the buzz of saws and the focused talk of students and teachers. He was seeing a new kind of legacy, one that couldn't be leveraged, or stolen, or corrupted by greed. It would be a legacy of shared knowledge, of skill passed from one hand to another. Elena was quiet for a moment, and then a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. A school, she repeated, the idea settling like it was always meant to be there. The Blackwood Academy for the Building Arts. It's a much better name. Arthur felt a stirring in his chest, a feeling he hadn't had since he first drove a nail into the frame of this very building. It was the feeling of a beginning. He had taken a stand not to destroy his son, but to protect his own life and what was honorable in his legacy. He had lost a business, and in a way, he had lost a son. But standing here, in the ruins, he realized he hadn't been defeated. He was simply clearing the ground to build something new. Something that would last. That registered letter was meant to be the final word on Arthur's life, a signature intended to erase him. But it ultimately revealed that the strongest foundations aren't made of concrete and wood, but of character and foresight. True legacy isn't just what you hand down, it's the moral framework you build for yourself, the one thing that can't be taken, even when everything else is lost. Thank you for watching this powerful story here on Content Channel. We love diving into these complex moral dilemmas, and this one is no exception. My question for you is, do you believe Arthur's use of the hidden failsafe clause was a perfect act of legitimate justice, or could he have shown mercy at some point before it led to his son's complete ruin? We appreciate you spending your time with us today. We'll see you for the next story, where we'll ask what happens when a sister, who has always been on the sidelines, discovers her own name is on a secret document that could change everything.